The agenda you see up here is roughly what we're going to try to cover in the next 3 hours. I have an opening presentation to give us representative workforce issues as I experience them. And then we have the keynote speaker for the afternoon is Wayne McKenzie. And then Eber Hampton will give us some questions and issues to think about. And we'll go into a break to talk about those questions around 2:15, 2:30. And in the last hour or so, we'll have hopefully a collective discussion about where we might want to go from here with this whole representative workforce idea. As I said, I have a bit of a personal history with this. I've been involved with it for the last 5 or 6 years as a former public servant. So I'm going to talk about my own perceptions about what I saw working on this issue. And also, since working in the university for the last year or so, I have access to some pretty good online databases. So I did a bit of a search around the issues and came up with a few studies and reports that have been written about representative workforce issues in Saskatchewan. And it had some interesting things, I think, to tell us. And also I have some statistics from SaskTrans Monitor to share, and then I'll get into some ideas about where we could go from here. For me, this story starts about 5 or 6 years ago. I was working for First Nations Inuit Health Branches, FNIB as it was called back then. And when I started with them in 2004, welcome, I was working in the regional office. And we were working on what became the Aboriginal Blueprint. I don't know if you remember it, but this was the Saskatchewan Agreement, which got tabled by the Premier for Saskatchewan Health. And this document, along with many others, became what was called the Kelowna Accord. I don't know if anybody remembers that piece of history, but basically it was an agreement reached in 2004, 2005 between the provinces and the federal government and First Nation and Métis organization, Inuit organizations across the country. And Saskatchewan had its own blueprint. It had its own regional document. And I was the bureaucrat on the federal side that worked on this. And one of the key things in here that we spent a lot of time haggling about the wording had to do with Aboriginal Health Human Resources. It basically said that all the existing initiatives were national role models and that they should be recognized as such and strongly encouraged in the work that would be going forward through the blueprint. So that was 2005. And just at the end of that year, in December 2005, the big partnership table that had been created to work on this in the health sector produced a day-long educational forum called A Dialogue of Partners in the Health Sector for a Representative Workforce. And this video is now quite an interesting piece of history, actually, because it tells the story of what we all believed to be important back then. I think those things are still important, but they have a new meaning given what's happened since. And we had a representative of the Ontario Coalition for Healthy Communities who was the keynote speaker, and she gave a presentation about the manual they had produced about how to build different types of partnerships, with that word in quotation marks, in the health sector, because it's a very loaded word. Some people think partnership means some sort of a merger. Other people think it just means handshake and goodwill and connecting by information. Partnerships can mean many things, and she elaborated on that in quite a lot of detail, explaining this spectrum of how you can be just a network sharing information all the way up to some sort of full collaboration or merger. But partnership was really the buzzword of this whole initiative. Partnerships were everywhere. And they were of these different types. Some of them were networks. Some of them were very strong alliances. Some of them were in the middle. They were actual sort of working arrangements that you could call what they call a partnership. And others were more like a political coalition trying to get things done. All of them were called partnerships. Oh, there's one of the stars of the show. That's what you looked like back then, Victoria. And she said that the regional health authorities had hired 1,900 people who at that point had self-declared as Aboriginal out of a workforce of about 36,000. So that gives us about 5.25% roughly of the health sector workforce as Aboriginal, which, as we'll see later, is not anywhere near being representative, but at least it was seen as a good beginning at the time. There was also another guy you recognize here today, Bill from CUPE, as well as other representatives from the Regina Saskatoon Health Authority, and Laurie, who was at that point working on the career pathing initiative. Basically, they were describing all these different types of initiatives that was the representative workforce strategy. Bill focused on the Aboriginal awareness programs that had been developed in the previous 5 or so years, I guess, it had taken to get those off the ground. And the two large health districts, Saskatoon and Regina, both had comprehensive strategies that were 2 or 3 years into being implemented at that point. And then there was career pathing that was just getting off the ground, and a couple of people who were involved in career pathing are here today. So through all of that, they, I think, gave a fairly good idea of what was happening in the off-reserve health sector. And just so we're not, I'm the only ones embarrassed, there's what I looked like 5 years ago. That's back when I worked for FNIB, and there was also representatives from Battleford Tribal Council, Gordon First Nation, and Northern Intertribal Health Authority, giving an overview of what the Aboriginal Health Human Resource challenges were in the on-reserve or First Nation health sector. The picture they painted was that there were a number of policy challenges at the federal level, but also some issues with their own service delivery that, again, could be attributed to federal policy problems.